Hello everyone and welcome. In this lecture we look at factor plots. As usual, we start by importing the libraries and modules that we need. And for this lecture we'll be using Seaborn's dataset known as exercise. Let's start by importing and loading the dataset, and we'll save it in a variable called exercise. Exercise is equal to sns.load dataset, and then we'll pass the dataset name, which is exercise. Run it. Let's see what the dataset looks like by calling the head method on the exercise dataset. So here we have 5 columns: unnamed, ID, diet, pulse, time, and kind. So the different kinds are like rest, walking or running, and time, and pulse. So it goes on like that. We'll be using some of these columns for our factor plot. For our first example, let's plot a factor plot for time and the pulse data. Okay, we'll call SNS factor plot method. SNS has a factor plot method, so we'll call that and then pass the x and y axis values. So on the x axis let's use time, and on the y axis let's use pulse, and we'll pass the data attribute and set it to exercise. Let's run it. So this is what we have: time and pulse. Okay, this is a simple factor plot, and I know that from our dataset we have 3 different kinds of activities. One is rest, another one is running, another one is walking. So what we can do is we can pass the hue attribute and set it to be kind, so that we can have 3 different factor plots for each of the kinds that we have here. Let's do that. So I'll copy on. Let's type it again: sns.factor plot, and then on the x-axis we'll use time, on the y-axis we'll use pulse, and our data comes from the exercise dataset. And let's pass the hue attribute and set it to be kind. So if we run it now, so we have kind as hue, and then rest, walking, and running. So this is a simple factor plot with time on the x-axis and then pulse on the y-axis. There's also another attribute known as kind, and we can pass that attribute to see various kinds of factor plots. Let's see a few examples. So sns.factor plot, then x is time, on the y-axis we have pulse, and then for hue we have kind, and this time, okay, we have our data comes from the exercise dataset, and for kind takes different values, and one such value is bar, so we can pass bar, and this is what it looks like. Okay, we have rest in blue, walking is green, and running is red. That's a factor pass. That's a factor plot for the bar kind. And other kinds, the other values that we can pass for the kind attribute is violin or count, and so on. Let's see a couple of those. Let's pass violin, and if we run it, we get a violin plot for our graph, right? And another let's see one more kind. So instead of bar, we can use box and run it. Now we have a box kind for our factor plot. Okay, so those are the different kinds of the different kind attribute values that we can use for our factor plot. And you can try out the rest of the kinds. I think there is one called strip and point, maybe. You can try those out. There is also a size attribute. If you want to make your plot bigger, you can pass the size attribute. Let me copy that, and let's pass a size attribute and set it to be equal to maybe 3, and let's see what it looks like. So that's what it looks like, 3. It's smaller. And if we pass 0.4, if we pass 1.5, this is what it looks like for the size. If we pass a size of 6, this is what we have. Now it's bigger. Let's remove the kind attribute and then see a simple factor plot. So that's our size attribute. You can pass different sizes to make your factor plot bigger or smaller. Let's look at our exercise dataset. Exercise.head. So here we have diet. We have two different kinds of diet, low fat and no fat. We can pass another attribute to show the kind of diet. For that, we can use the column attribute. Let's see an example. So SNS.factor plot, and then as usual we have time on our x-axis and then pulse on the y-axis. Pulse, our data is coming from the exercise dataset, exercise, and then the column, it's the attribute is called column, and we'll set it to be diet. And let's not forget the hue attribute and set it to be kind. Now if we run this, we'll have two factor plots in our graph. One is for no fat diet, and then the other one is for low fat diet. So that's the column attribute. Okay, and if you want to change the default size of your factor plot, you can still pass the size attribute and set it to, let's say, 4 maybe. Let's see what it looks like. So 4 looks a bit smaller, I guess. Let's pass a size of 8. Now it's much bigger. So you can adjust the size of your factor plot. Great. Let's see one more example of a factor plot. And for this example, we'll use another dataset known as the Titanic dataset. So we'll load that from SNS, from Seaborn, and save it in a variable called Titanic. So SNS.load dataset, and then we'll pass our Titanic dataset. So if we call Titanic.head, this is what it looks like. We have a bunch of columns: survival, passenger class, sex, age, and so on. Okay, let's plot a graph for a factor plot for two of this data in our dataset. Let's consider the who column and the survived columns. So we'll use those as our x and y variables. Let's do that. So SNS.factor plot, and then we'll pass for our x-axis, let's pass who, and for our y-axis we'll pass survived. So y is equal to survived, and our dataset is coming from the Titanic dataset. Titanic. Okay, let's see what it looks like. Okay, just have a single line. This is not very descriptive. So what we can do is I think a bar graph will be a much more descriptive kind. So let's pass a bar graph for kind. Let's see what it looks now. Okay, now we have who, man, woman, and child, and survived. So this is much better. And another attribute that we can pass is the column attribute. So similar to what we have seen earlier, low fat versus no fat. For our column, we can pass, for instance, passenger class or even class. So the class will be first class, second class, or third class. So that will give it, we'll have more description. So let's pass the column attribute and set it to be equal to class. Let's see our factor plot now. Now it's much more better, right? On the x-axis we have who. On the y-axis we have survived. Data is coming from the Titanic data set, and we have kind, bar, column is class, and these are the confidence interval values, the sticks, and we can remove those by passing another attribute known as confidence interval, and we can set the considered interval value to be none. That way the ticks won't appear anymore. Great. Now we don't have any ticks. Okay, so this is an example of a factor plot by passing various attributes in our factor plot method. Another thing we can do is give our x and y axis names by using the set axis labels method. What we can do is save this factor plot method in a variable. Let's save it in a variable called x, and what we can do is call the set axis labels method on x. So set axis labels, and then we'll pass axis names for our x-axis. Let's pass passengers maybe, and for our y-axis let's pass rate of survival. You can pass any column name. Okay, let's do that. And if we run this, now we have the passengers on our on the x-axis. So that's the x-axis label, and on our y-axis we have rate of survival. Okay, so those are some of the things that we can do with factor plots. Just to summarize, we looked at how we can draw factor plots and the different attributes that we can pass to visualize our factor plots. Great. Thank you, everyone.